Man, oh man, what a day. This is Matt Weaver, Autoweek Associate Motorsports Editor, and this is the Autoweek IndyCar 2020 season preview. And it's the 2020 IndyCar season preview that I never anticipated having to record. I'm here alongside Joey Barnes, my IndyCar specialist, but really he's a racer at heart too. And we are recording this in St. Petersburg, Florida, in advance of the opening weekend, to where the entire motorsports world, if not the entire sports world and the entire planet Earth, has been brought to a new reality. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you're wrapped up in all things COVID-19, the coronavirus, and so are we here in the motorsports world. IndyCar will open its season here in the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. The race will not be open to the public. Only essential personnel, select annual credential hard card media members will be there. Joey and I will both be here, and it's going to be a different race environment than we've ever seen before. And it's our new reality, at least for a little while. We've had other races follow suit. NASCAR is going to race behind closed doors as well at Atlanta Motor Speedway, but the NHRA has already postponed their event. Super Sebring down the road for the World Endurance Championship, and the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Series also postponing Super Sebring. And it's going to be just NASCAR and IndyCar having the sporting world to themselves, because all the stick and ball sports have shut down for the foreseeable future over the coronavirus concern. So we've got a job to do. We're going to talk about everything that we've seen and experienced, and this is going to be a different kind of season preview. We're going to talk about the things we would have talked about anyway, but we're going to talk about this new world we live in too. So with that being said, I'm going to bring in Joey Barnes here. Joey, you were actually at the press conference down at the police station at St. Petersburg, where they kind of broke into why this race is still taking place. So I guess I want to start there with you. I want to ask you, what did you learn today when the whole world is shutting down not only sports but entertainment? Why are we still covering a race this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the situation as it's played out so far, there's a growing sense that we have way more questions still, even after the conference, the announcement with the mayor. Mark Miles was there, along with Green Savory Racing Promotions, Kim Green and Kevin Savory. And I think that there's a feeling that because this race is a temporary street circuit, this city rallies around this. It's a season opener. There's so much momentum that you're trying to get through. Let's not forget that it's also the first official race under the Penske era. Those things combined, there's a lot of heat to get this thing going, and I'm interested to see, because we've seen so many things in Florida right now. NHRA, you mentioned Super Sebring, just kind of crack and wilt under the situation. And I think this is kind of a statement. The mayor said that they're trying to eliminate the risk of mass involvement, meaning the fans and the attendance, so that way it limits the risk. And they're trying to put together a situation where the drivers can still race. There's still some safety innovations involved. Dr. Billows with IndyCar is going to put together a process to help with the medical screening. And like I said, we got way more questions, a lot more things that we'll learn tomorrow when we get to the track. But I think at the moment, it's going on because they're going to try to push like hell to get this forward, because it's going to be almost impossible to get this race back if you totally wash this away immediately.
So to kind of give everyone an idea of what this is going to be like, before we even go into the racetrack, by the time you listen to this on Friday, we're going to have to fill out a questionnaire talking about our health history, who we've come in contact with, and then once we get to the racetrack and pick up our credentials, our hard cards, we're actually going to have to go through a screening process. They're going to take our temperature, using some kind of sensor. They're going to ask us questions. They've got the St. Petersburg street course locked down. Television's going to be here, so you can continue to watch the race on the NBC Sports Network here in the United States, in Canada, international, whoever your broadcast partner is. I know that's been a storyline, and we can talk about that down the road too. But the race will be on TV. The race is going to take place as of now, and it's going to be different. We're not going to be able to interview drivers like we're accustomed to. I don't even know if we're going to be allowed to walk through the paddock. I don't know if we can be able to walk down pit road and even detail the sights and sounds. I don't know. And I guess that kind of becomes the story of what this race is going to look like in front of no fans. It's going to look like a desert. I mean, you made the joke earlier, Joey, that you're going to see the tumbleweed rolling down the road after the last car passes by. And interviews are going to be done through either a teleconference line or a video board of some kind. I don't know. But, I'll say this. I hate it for race fans. I hate it for sports fans. I hate it for people. I hate it for anyone that's afflicted by this sickness. This is a human story before it is anything else, but just from a pure racing standpoint, there is a story to tell here, and it's interesting and it's different. And certainly as a journalist and as a media member, we're going to talk about the race, but we're going to talk about what this event has become. And if I sound like I'm at a loss for words, I just never thought I'd be kind of living in this world. Like, I keep saying it, this is our new reality. This is our new reality. Joey, does this feel as surreal to you as it does me?
Yeah, I mean, that's the word I would use, is surreal. I mentioned on Twitter earlier that there's like an eerie sense with the way that things are playing out right now. And it continues to feel eerie. I mean, you go to the store and the shelves are empty of toilet paper, so the rumors are definitely true about that. We learned that the hard way going to the store earlier. And I do get the sense of a tumbleweed, and just there's this overbearing aura, this atmosphere. And even though this is a situation that, quite frankly, none of us really know how it's going to turn out, we all have, as I mentioned earlier, the questions. I think the thing that I look at and take from this is that we're really into a situation where this is a high-risk, high-reward situation, because you're running into a scenario where, quite honestly, we're going to continue to try to do this for 3 more days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. IndyCar is going to be on track Saturday, Sunday. The road to Indy is going to be on track Friday and a little bit on Saturday. And we couldn't have anticipated this 24 hours ago. So I have no idea what the next 24 hours is going to bring. And you've got to think that, the WHO, the CDC, things like that, organizations that involve health, and I believe that there's pressure there. But I also think that this is an opportunity and maybe a statement to say that this is a chance to, I don't want to say fight against what's coming, because you can't fight what you can't see. But I also think that this is a situation where if this comes about and it works, even though it's still painful because the fans aren't there to see it, it's still going to be, as Mark Miles alluded to in that conference, and national and internationally televised for the viewers. So there's still an audience there to grab. And with nothing else on television, because literally we're staring at, you go to a sports bar, you're watching ESPN talk about the coronavirus, you're not really watching sports. So this is a chance for literally NASCAR and IndyCar to grab hold of this thing and push it to the forefront and maybe make their mark. But I'm really curious to see how far this mark can go, because as we saw earlier today, the mayor of Long Beach pushed that race, postponed it from April, and there's still questions to be had there. So I'm really curious where this is going to play out. But I do know that this new era, this new Penske era, there's a lot of different elements. We've got, as you said, the aero kit with the aero screen, and we've got all these young guys that have come into the sport, and there's so many great narratives and great stories to tell already. And to have this, it almost feels like just a black cloud that you don't want to talk about because it really takes the shine away from all the things that are such positive momentum grabbers for the series over this past offseason.
I promise we'll talk about race cars here in just a minute, but I want to make one more note about, again, the new era that we live in. I was in ninth grade after September 11th, 2001. So I remember pretty well everything that happened back then, and I remember not having NASCAR. I'm a big baseball guy, so I remember the Chicago Cubs season being delayed, and I think there's a lot of similarities here. I mean, I think the president's speech on Wednesday kind of opened a lot of people's eyes, and certainly we're not going to talk politics, but I think that made people aware to how serious this situation is. And this is how it's different than 9/11, though. With 9/11, the attacks happened. There was the aftermath of the attacks. There were the videos and the pictures from New York, and you could see it. It was a known commodity. And the thing that's just so terrifying about this, and it's so terrifying to be here in Florida, where there have been cases reported, in Pinellas County, Florida, where there have been 2 cases reported earlier this week. You can't see it. And that's what makes this whole thing so frightening, because it does have a lethality rate just higher than 3%. And yes, I'm young, but you just never know. You can't see it like you could the attacks. You couldn't see it like you could the aftermath of New York. And you hear about what's happening in Italy, and you see how Formula One responded to what was going on in Australia. And that part is just so unnerving. And on one hand, I feel anxious to be able to talk about racing, because that's always been the thing that distracts us. And in 9/11, that's how we rallied around our community, and we did it through sports. Right now, sports are being shut down. So while there's a part of me that questions the reasons that NASCAR and IndyCar are choosing to do this, there's also an opportunity for our community to help other communities kind of relax and ease its way through this. And I hope that there are no consequences from IndyCar and NASCAR running these races, because I think it could be, to your point, Joey, a huge benefit for a community that needs something to rally around.
Yeah, that's kind of the statement I was trying to make earlier about it. But I will say this: you run into a scenario where the risk is really great here. I mean, you run into a scenario, we're all making contact with the other humans of the world, and it's all to me, I'm going to view it like a spider web, right? Like everything is intertangled together, and everything interweaves together. And so at some element, we've probably, whether we realize it or not, been interacting with somebody that had COVID-19. And that's a scary thought. At the same time, we continue to see how this thing plays out. And there's no telling what happens on Sunday. There's no telling if we get to Sunday without this getting postponed. But I can tell you that earlier today, just a small brief story, I sat there and was running, trying to chase down this police station mayor's conference for this 3 p.m. announcement that was happening. And I ended up having to get in an Uber and went around, got escorted by this lovely lady, and she took me down to the police station. And in the process, she was talking to me about the race and about the impact that it's had and how it's going to impact her business. And that really made an impression on me and set the tone that there's so many businesses in this area that are impacted by this race not going forward with fans in the grandstands. And while it's at least going forward, I can only think about the impact, because this community loves this race, and it's rallied, and it's become a fixture on the schedule for the past 15 years. And that's something I don't think we should take lightly, because while the Indy 500 and obviously the Grand Prix of Long Beach have built itself up as the crown jewels of the sport on the 17-race schedule, you look at St. Pete, and it really has built a platform for itself and holds its own. And a lot of that's due to how this community has rallied around this race, and the mayor sees what it's been able to provide. And I wonder how this situation plays out moving forward, like I said, and we're going to talk about it plenty of times, there's going to be a lot more questions than answers that we have at this point in time. But, what is the potential gain and what is the potential fallout moving forward? Because should this race not go on, do we run into a scenario where there's a risk that we don't get this race back? And I think that's a really heavy question that nobody can really answer at this time.
Let's talk about IndyCar. Let's talk about IndyCar 2020. Let's actually press the reset button on this podcast, because this is how I plan to start it originally. Like, okay, this is what we're here to do. And again, I don't want to dismiss or downplay anything that's happening. This is the part that we just talked about, the bringing the community together part. I did want to address the very real scenario that we're going to be facing this weekend, but there's a lot of things to look forward to too. I mean, we get to talk racing, and I think that IndyCar is so freaking fascinating this year. I mean, I think most of you guys know, and Joey knows too. I'm a stock car guy at my base form. My grandparent, or my granddad and my dad both raced stock cars. I raced a little bit too. I'm not an open wheel guy. And I remember the first time I used to race too. I used to drive an open wheel go-kart, and I remember telling my dad I didn't want to drive this go-kart. I wanted to drive a go-kart that had a roof over it, because I wanted to be a NASCAR driver. I didn't want to be an IndyCar driver. And here I am, 20 years later, and I'm really happy to be covering more IndyCar this year, because I think the dynamic is so exciting and so fascinating. And I got a chance to cover more races last year, and I asked to do most of this year's schedule, because just the dynamic is so cool. So you've got the last holdouts of the old IRL era, the Scott Dixons and Tony Kanaan's last partial season. Will Power has kind of become the face with Ryan Hunter-Reay of the 2000s. This is, in many ways, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the last hurrahs for Marco Andretti and Graham Rahal to kind of meet the promise of becoming the expected faces of the old Indy Racing League, and it just never got a chance to happen. And you got the up-and-coming drivers of this current generation now. You've got Colton Herta, and you've got Alexander Rossi, and you've got Felix Rosenquist from Chip Ganassi Racing. You just got such a great dynamic here. And you got Santino Ferrucci, who we got a chance to get to know a little bit better at the Chili Bowl. We talked about him. And the personalities here are just so dynamic, and the racing is so good. It's the alternative. When people say, well, why am I drawn to IndyCar right now? Listen, I've been very critical of NASCAR going to high downforce and super low horsepower. Well, IndyCar has got big power, and they've taken off a lot of downforce with these cars. They have a great balanced schedule. I believe that the IndyCar champion might be the most talented champion of any discipline. I mean that, full stop, because to be the champion of IndyCar, you've got the ovals, you've got big ovals, you got Indianapolis, you got road courses, you got street courses, and I think it just tests you in so many ways. So Joey, I'm so excited to actually be talking about race cars now, because it's been a long off season. I remember when I left San Francisco last year, I thought to myself, man, I wish I had closer to 36 IndyCar races, because I just started to hit my stride after kind of taking over that beat last year. I'm so happy to be back. I wish it were different circumstances, but let's talk racing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about damn time, right? So, just to kind of get into it here, I mean, obviously, Joseph Newgarden, defending champ, got 2 championships in the last 3 years, and literally looks like he's filled that moniker as the face of the series, as the face of Team Penske, really. And I think it's interesting that he's kind of the guy that's bringing in this new wave that is under this Penske era. I look at Jay Fry and the work that everybody from Dallara, Tino Belli, PPG, Red Bull, Advanced Technologies with the aero screen, from the universal aero kits a couple years ago to this patient approach when everything could have been easily a knee-jerk reaction with the Halo device and all this. IndyCar was patient with the screen. We run into a situation where this thing looks like an awesome jet fighter. And I think that taking that approach is going to pay off big in a lot of different ways. There's still a few things that everybody's got to work out. Let's be honest here. You got a lot of bugs, and at COTA we learned about cooling and this and that, but this thing's got a lot of tools and usability. I think the question, like Ed Carpenter was talking to me at the test, and one of his concerns is how's this going to hold up on an oval when you're in mid-pack and you've got a ton of stuff from the track, rubber, oil, etc., flying up and hitting your windscreen, and you've got to run into a tear-off situation. And quite honestly, that's kind of an interesting situation, because how many tear-offs are you willing to go through early on, and you might run out before you get to that final stint. So there's some variables that play into this. So the learning part is the most exciting part on the aero screen, and the fact that I believe that Jay Fry and his team should be applauded for how good they methodically worked with that and how they're implementing all these things in stages. And I feel like, to the point that you made about NASCAR, from my point of view, because I'm not a stock car guy, I look at a lot of things that NASCAR's done, and I feel like a lot of these things are knee-jerk reactions in some cases. And I might be wrong, but that's just my outside view and my outside perspective. And I look at how Jay Fry has methodically handled things, and that's exactly why I use the word methodical, because it feels like the process has been taking its time, getting the feedback, going through the due course and a checklist. He likes to use the term checks all the boxes. I can't tell you how many times we've heard Jay say that, and certainly what's taken place over the last few years, it certainly does check all the boxes. And so to that, we enter 2020. We got a whole cast of rookies, new drivers. Oliver Askew, bad fast, Indy Lights champion with McLaren. We got a McLaren team with Aero McLaren SP, and they're going to be run with Chevy. We got Fernando Alonso, at the Indy 500. We got Jimmy Johnson testing for McLaren. We got all these awesome things, and I think it's interesting that we're starting to approach the situation where people recognize that these cars are cool and that drivers kind of accept the fact. I look at Jimmy Johnson, 7-time champion, doesn't have to prove anything after winning 7 titles on the NASCAR circuit, and he would want to accept the challenge to come over to IndyCar and just to see what these things are about. And I think, one, that's a statement about him being a true racer, but I also think that that's a statement about IndyCar just being really, really cool and intriguing to a lot of people. And you've got all these guys coming over from Europe, Formula F1 guys. Marcus Ericsson comes to mind. Obviously, Max Chilton a couple years ago. Alexander Rossi, who had a handful of races and comes over, and now you could argue he's the face of the series. All these things have built up. And IndyCar finds itself now on a raised platform that maybe we talk about the IRL era. I would argue that we didn't quite see that in the IRL era.
Well, let's do this one thing at a time, because I think both of us are getting a little long-winded here. Let's talk about the windscreen. The aero screen. We talked about how IndyCar has done a great job of being able to, methodically work at it. Jay Fry and his team, they had the deflection device last year, and they decided they could do better, and that wasn't a knee-jerk thing. That was a proactive thing. But at the end of the day, I know for a lot of fans, it doesn't matter how much the data shows that it's safer, that drivers are going to be more protected by it. It has to look cool too. It has to look right. And I know that some people think that it looks too much like a prototype, like a sports car. Personally, I like it. And I'm just curious, we can talk about safety, and they've been shooting frozen turkeys at the aero screen, and it's worked. So I know there's some questions about whether or not the carbon fiber can hold it. We'll forget that for a minute. We'll see what happens when it happens. But I want to talk to you, Joey, about the aesthetics. To me, I think the car looks like a starship with wheels, and I think it's just cool as hell. What do you think?
I would agree. I mean, it feels 100% like a scenario where it is a starship, and I think that ultimately it's an open wheel car still. And that's the thing that I don't understand. People get so wrapped up in, well, you might as well just make it a DPI sports car. No, dude, guys, come on. This thing's still open wheel. It's still hard as hell to drive, and these drivers are still working their tail off. And I think something, and I go back to Ed Carpenter just because he had some really good things to say. He mentioned how just helping out with the rookie orientation at Texas Motor Speedway a few weeks ago, it kind of changed the sensation that he felt, because the wind's not hitting him directly in the visor anymore. Now it's hitting the windscreen going up and kind of getting behind his helmet. And so there's little elements to that that need to be worked through. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's going to be a little different. It's going to be cool. But these things are still open wheel cars, and I think it's going to continue to showcase how good the racing in this series really is.
And the thing I would say too is like this is not the final product. I think that the best way to look at the aero screen is that we're about to have a new car, an IndyCar for drivers and teams to utilize, and this aero screen was kind of mated to the current car. But I thought that once you had the liveries and the paint schemes put on it, they look damn cool. But I would tell everyone that if you don't like what this car looks like, wait for the new car, because I think it's being designed around the aero screen, and that it's going to look a little more like it belongs. Although again, I think it looks cool as hell. I think that it looks like a race car. It looks racy. It looks like something out of NASA, and ultimately, we don't know how it's going to race, and that'll probably be the thing because it's going to change the aero completely. It is way more of a bullet now. I think the car is going to be a little faster, especially on the ovals, because it's going to cut through the air. I think it's going to draft really well. I cannot wait to see the Indianapolis 500 because this thing is shaped like a bullet. I think it's going to suck up so well. I think the drag on it combined with the wind coming off the aero screen, I think that we have the potential to see the original DW12 style racing, which was the slipstream and the slingshots on the front stretch and the back stretch. I think that was great racing. I think we might see something very similar to that. But let's talk about the overall dynamic this year. I think the last couple of years it's been kind of the Joseph Newgarden and Alexander Rossi show. Simon Pagenaud was able to sneak into that conversation last year by winning the Indianapolis 500, saving his career. We can't play the what if game because Alexander Rossi was not going to leave Andretti, and I think that everyone kind of suggested that he had his mind made up that he wanted to stay there. It's home. But you just never know. I mean, maybe if Simon doesn't show off well and win Indy, win the pole, win the 500, maybe Roger pulls out all the stops. I don't know if he had another lever to pull. I don't know. But I think that's going to be a very similar story this year. I think it's going to be, Newgarden, Pagenaud, Rossi. Will Power has something to prove. We'll get to him in a minute. But I think that right now, Joey, the question here is, I'm going to put it to you point blank. Right now, we get to, I say September and Laguna Seca, I don't know, like wherever the championship is and whenever the championship is, who do you got for the championship?
That is not something I've actually thought about, to be completely honest with you. I was actually thinking more about Indy. I really like where Simon's head's at. Like Simon Pagenaud, now that he's won Indy, it's a different feeling. It's kind of similar to how Will was after he won Indy in 2018, very relaxed. And obviously Will didn't quite show up to the level that we expected a year ago. Had some issues. I look at Coda when he was leading and then had a mechanical issue in the pits very late in the race. So he had some get away from him. But Simon, and I've said this to a lot of y'all whenever we're talking just kind of between you and I, Matt, is that while Dixon is ultra amazing and while Will Power is ultra amazing and their pace is phenomenal and at any given time they can go out and dominate, Alexander Rossi, we see him go out and win by 27, 28 seconds, and he's got dominating, furious pace sometimes. I look at Simon Pagenaud, and I don't know if anybody's best is equal to his best. Now, he hits very few and far between with that, but when he's in the zone, I don't know if anybody can really match him on that level. That being said, consistency for the championship, to give you the long-winded answer, because we're going long-winded, I'm going to continue to go with Joseph Newgarden because, quite honestly, he continues to get better each year. He continues to put the level of performance there, and quite honestly, Team Penske, the combination with him continuing to grow within an organization, there's continuity there. And he doesn't really have a weakness as far as the track goes. Like maybe the Indianapolis Grand Prix is the one weakness you could say he has. But, he could have easily walked away with the championship in situations if he didn't spin on the last lap at Mid-Ohio, didn't have the incident at Gateway. double points could have potentially not even mattered for the season finale. So I look at him. I look at Rossi, who definitely needs to execute in some certain runs in certain areas. And I think for Rossi, I just kind of looking at last year's points, it really is about getting out of the gate strong because, starting in St. Pete, Dakota to Barber, finishes of 5th, 9th, and 5th, where you look at Joseph and it was finishes of 1st, 2nd, and 4th. 2 podiums right out of the gate. That's really difficult to compete with.
Well, Indianapolis sank him too. I mean, that's double points. And you talk about getting out of the gate strong. I think that you got to circle the championship race and you got to circle Indianapolis for obvious reasons, but also because of the double points nature. And yeah, getting off to a strong start, being fast, all that stuff, blah blah blah. But
well, who do you got?
Who do I got? I'll get there in a minute. But I think that it's about all of this. It's weird. It's such a cliche answer, but I think that it's just Alexander Rossi. And I'll tell you, like when we first started to talk about what we were going to talk about in the podcast, I told myself willpower, 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 and I think Will Power is going to kind of reassert himself as the big dog at Team Penske this year. Newgarden will still be there. I think Simon will be as consistent as ever. I don't think he's going to fall back into that low point he was in 2 years ago. But I think Will Power is going to be the man at Team Penske, and I think it's going to be Will Power versus Alexander Rossi, with Rossi edging him out based on the fact that he's going to win the double points finale.
I think there's a couple of things that we've got to be careful to discount here, and one is we continue to overlook Scott Dixon, right? And he's got Michael Cannon this year, a very veteran, very proven, amazing engineer up on his timing stand. I think it's going to be key to see how quickly they can get established together to figure out if they can wage an attack on everybody else. But also, I look at guys like Colton Herta and Felix Rosenquist, who you look at Colton, my goodness, like you could argue that he could have finished top 3 or had even a handful of more wins if certain things were executed better. So if he can grow from that in a sophomore year, which is usually a challenging year because the joke of the sophomore slump, and the same for Felix, who's still searching for his first win but won Rookie of the Year last year. If they can execute at a higher level, I really think that they can make some noise for this championship, and that's honestly the thing that I'm most intrigued by moving forward. And that's part of why I think it's a little too early for those guys, and that's why I look at a guy like Joseph Newgarden, 9th season, 3 championships, 9 years, still searching for that Indy 500 win to complete that legacy, which is asinine to think when the kid's not even 30 years old yet.
Speaking of the championship and having a good championship season, I think one guy, I don't think he's going to be a championship guy just because there's way too much going against him. All the different cars he's driving and all the different situations. I want so desperately to talk about Connor Daly. I think Connor Daly's season this year is going to be so much fun to watch. Not only is he driving for 2 different teams, he's driving 3 different entries because he's going to be in the 21 for Carpenter at Indianapolis, right? The 21?
Yes.
Yeah, and he's going to be in the 20 for the road and street courses, and then he's going to be with. Do I have that right or no?
He'll be in a. I don't remember if the entries.
I think
for Indy, but you got Renus, who's his teammate.
Yeah, but I think Ed's going to be in the 20 for the ovals, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so he would be in the 21 for Indianapolis.
I think that's Renus.
Okay, well, point is you got Connor in 3 different entries across 2 teams, 1 manufacturer, and I can't wait to talk to Connor because I don't think the story has been published anywhere yet about all the levers he had to pull to be able to make that work, because I can't imagine that Ed, who owns a team, would want a guy that he has under contract to go race for someone else. But at the same time, Ed's a racer, and I think that when Ed sat down and thought about it and was like, Connor wants to do this, like I would want to do it. I would want to run for a championship, or at least try to get into the top 10 and be in the winner's circle and all that type stuff. And I don't know how good the Carlin stuff is because I don't think a driver has quite pushed it, and Connor did push it. Connor has been the guy to get the most out of it, and I think we know that Ed's stuff is really good. We haven't really seen consistently how good Ed's stuff is on the road and street courses, because obviously Ed was never that guy when he was full-time. Spencer Piggott was a high ceiling, low floor kind of guy, and I love Spencer, but I think that's a fair assessment of Spencer. And I think Connor, who's still a super young driver, super inexperienced driver, I think Connor proved last year driving for 20 different teams that he can get a lot out of the car and deal with this situation as good as anyone. He is going to be so much fun to watch this year.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. I think the interesting thing here is when you're Ed Carpenter and you make that decision, I mean, how could you possibly go wrong? Because if Connor shines, then there could be an opportunity for the funding to come together for the following year. And I think that's the most crucial thing. And he's helped build Carlin's program. I mean, you look last year, they were in a very trying year, and you look at the fact that he got finishes of 10th, or sorry, 10th was with Andretti at Indy, but you look at 6th at Gateway. It's miraculous to see what he did. I mean, he sat there and qualified in the back with a relatively new engineer at Texas, and he drove that thing up to 11th. And Texas, obviously, as we've learned, is kind of the wild card of all wild cards the last couple of years. So he's certainly a fascinating tale. And I think the biggest thing is he helps establish a little bit of continuity and consistency with Carlin, because Carlin is a team that I believe firmly belongs in this series. I would argue that in some cases, if they wanted to make a run at F1, I think they could pull it off. I mean, obviously the money, good luck, but from just a talent standpoint, they certainly don't lack in that department in any area. Excuse me. But I think there's going to be key growths here. You mentioned Graham Rahal earlier. And I think that's very interesting because we talk about the old guard and we talk about the face of
Hold that thought.
previous.
I want to get to him in a minute.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, I tell you what. How about this? You're talking about a guy like Connor Daly coming into the series. What are your expectations when you look at a lineup like McLaren with Patricio Ward, who has really showed some really good pace when he stepped into an IndyCar, and then you got a guy like Oliver Askew, who obviously looks the part, certainly wins quite often in the Road to Indy. He's one of the most successful, if not the most successful to date, Road to Indy driver. Kind of ironically enough, comes in as Spencer Piggott, who you could say is the former most successful Road to Indy guy. It's interesting how that changes over, but what is the expectation for a McLaren lineup that's going to be leaning on Robert Wickens as kind of a mentor on the sidelines while they're trying to establish their careers with an organization like that?
Well, let me turn that around on you. Let me, Oliver, ask you the question, because I actually don't know. I'll be totally honest, and I will admit my strengths and weaknesses. I am the relatively IndyCar newcomer. I actually did 2 full seasons in 12 and 13 and had a lot of fun, but I didn't really cover a lot of the road to Indy at the time. I don't know the young guys. The cool thing about me and the way that I cover stock car racing is that I do cover a ton of late model racing. So there's a ton of great veterans there, a lot of young drivers. And I would like to cover the road to Indy in the same way that I do cover the stock car ladder system as well, and that day will come, but I really don't know. So I hear the world of those guys, and I hear that, obviously, McLaren came in and they partnered with Sam Schmidt to create this team, and they've got Fernando Alonso coming back with them for the Indianapolis 500. But I thought it spoke volumes of both of those kids' talents that Award and Askew that Zach Brown wanted them. Of all the drivers they could have, I know there's some veterans out there who could have been great building blocks. Sebastian Bourdais, a 4-time champion for road course and street course kind of building block guy. Tony Kanaan, the oval kind of guy who was looking for something. You have a lot of veterans out there looking for something, and they wanted these 2 young kids because that's their foundation, their building block. I don't know much about them, but I know enough knowing that they're in both of those cars.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the more crucial things in this whole process for those 2 young cats that are going to be in this ride, one, Pato showed what he could do last year at COTA. I mean, just going side by side, wheel to wheel with Graham Rahal and doing it in a clean way and impressed the hell out of Rahal. I remember talking to Graham post-race, and he was just in awe of what Pato was able to do and what literally was his second ever IndyCar series start. I look at Oliver. I think that he's got the mentality to definitely just continue to raise his game and grow with the series and grow. But I think and grow within the team. But I think the most crucial aspect to both of them is the veteran presence of engineer Craig Hampson coming over. And I know Craig Hampson's going to be helping call in the shots for Fernando's Indy 500 effort, but I can't help but look at what he's going to be as an influencer to that team as it grows. And I think that's only going to help them. But one last thing before we go to the Graham Rahal thing. We talked about Santino Ferrucci. You allude to him. He had the third highest finish on ovals of any IndyCar driver, and this kid was a rookie, never been contesting on ovals prior to last year. I'm kind of curious. He steps into a situation where he loses his mentor with Sebastian Bourdais. He now is the leader over at Dale Coyne Racing with rookie teammate Alex Palou that came over from finishing third in Super Formula, was Rookie of the Year over in there. And that dynamic is very interesting to me because I don't think the world understands Alex Palou yet, at least over here in IndyCar. But he could be a lethal talent. Even though he's in Dale Coyne Racing with Team Go equipment, he's got the talent, and he certainly got the adaptability. Seeing that firsthand at COTA, seeing it firsthand at the Texas Motor Speedway oval orientation, and this dynamic between the two, I'm interested to see how that plays out, obviously. But what do you make of Santino Ferrucci coming in, new role? Sometimes we see these guys, and he dodged quite a few big incidents, which it takes talent to do that, obviously. You know, surviving is half the battle in some of these races. What are kind of your expectations with him? What would be a good year in your words for this kid?
Oh, Santino Ferrucci. Okay, so Santino carries. He's a lightning rod. He generates a lot of opinions. You know, no one says Santino Ferrucci, and it's like, It's like, oh, it's like NBC and Racer. Oh, I love him. He's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I love him as much as I like talking about Mario Andretti. And then part of the internet rolls their eyes. And then come the internet haters, and it's like, oh, I hate Santino Ferrucci, and that punk. Look what he did in Formula 2 and over in Europe, and what a cocky, arrogant brat. And no one just goes, eh. Where I'm getting at is that when it comes to Santino Ferrucci, no one's ever questioned his drive. No one's ever questioned his commitment to excel behind the wheel. It's always been behavioral stuff. Now, I think I speak for both you and I that we kind of got new perspective from Santino about his experience in Europe and some things that were misunderstood. And certainly I didn't understand either. Now, to be fair, I pressed him on what happened there at Gateway, and in kind of a cool moment, Santino was like, yeah, it pissed me off. And that's cool. That's kind of some behind the scenes stuff there. But I wanted to understand. And I think there's more to that story than what Santino has led on publicly. And we talked to him about it at Chili Bowl, and he said, I just don't care. He's like, I'm ready to move on. I want, if people want to put the black hat on me, I'll be the black hat guy. I'll be the villain that IndyCar needs. And I respect that. IndyCar certainly needs a black hat villain. I don't think that we're ever going to talk about Santino and it'd be a question of can he make that next step as a driver. I think that we need to see Santino just become whatever man he's going to become. Is there some room for him to grow up and mature? Sure. How old is he? He's 20. He's 21, 22. Oh my God, I'm 31. I'm still growing up. So he's not totally the man that he's going to become. I can't wait to see him fully embrace whatever role the IndyCar community gives him. And if TV wants to play that up and help him wear the black hat, you know what? IndyCar needs one anyway. So I hope that he and Dale Coyne take that next step and become super competitive. They were right there on the cusp. And, super bad luck by Sebastian Bourdais. You've seen Bourdais carry that team over the years, and there's been some technical changes there too. But I think that if he can elevate that team, he could be such the villain that IndyCar needs. And I don't think it's totally warranted. But you know what? Yeah, if fans want to boo him, have at it. I don't think that it was fair for fans to boo. Why am I having such a brain? It's so late. It's Dario Franchitti. Fans used to boo the hell out of Dario Franchitti because he just won all the time, and Dario's so classy, right? And if Santino can become that guy, he doesn't deserve it either. IndyCar needs that kind of personality.
I mean, at one point, people booed Darrell Waltrip, right? And then by the end of his career, people were cheering him. So I think the key for anything, though, is win, right? You need a villain. If you're going to have a villain, he's still got to be a threat to win. He can't just be somebody that just stews around in mid-pack. But I think the next step for him is definitely to cross that threshold for podiums. He's got three fourth-place finishes, So I think the next step for him is to definitely cross into that threshold. But and it's nice to see Dale Coyne establish some continuity, because we've seen throughout the years that he's not afraid to just continue to rotate young drivers to help fill a budget.
He didn't have a choice, though.
That's very true. This is a very interesting situation that's played out, but I'm happy to see it. And maybe amid all the Colton Hertas, the Felix Rosenquist, and all these faces for all these respective teams, Dale Coyne's got the face of his team for maybe the next 5 years. And I'll go back to something that Dixon has said previously. There are no small teams in IndyCar anymore. The thing that he learned with Michael Cannon coming over is just because that they did it previously one way, he comes in and shows that the teams are spending, all the smaller teams, quote-unquote smaller teams, are putting all their money in different resources, and yet it puts them on the same level as far as pace goes. So there's new intricate little tools that the smaller teams have, but make no mistake, like Dixon said, and I fully agree with him, the small teams aren't really so small anymore.
Okay, so now I'm going to go back to Graham Rahal. And we've talked about this off the air, so I know this is the answer you're going to go to. So I'm not even going to ask it as a question. I'm just going to ask you to tell me, why is this the year that Graham Rahal needs to make a statement? Because we were going to talk about who needs to make a statement the most, and you've told me before you think this is a Graham Rahal statement kind of year. How come?
I think when you look at the situation, they were a solo team, and it was obviously under the manufacturer Aerokit era, and you saw him showcase championship caliber potential, wins, podiums, consistently a threat anywhere and everywhere. He was somebody that you couldn't rule out. And you look at the fact that you come in, this is the third year now with Takuma as his teammate, so they got some continuity established there, which is huge for a program that was a solo outfit for so long. And Takuma's come in and grabbed wins each of the past 2 years. And so I think when you see that, and Graham has been in the fight, but sometimes misfortune has struck and just eluded him of a victory, I think this is a crucial year to see him kind of seal the deal and at least be evenly matched, not with pace alone, but with finishes. If Taku's continuing to go and grab those wins at certain places, like I look at Portland, you look at how dominant they were at Barber, my goodness, last year. That was an amazing showing. I think this is a year for Graham to establish that those years as a championship caliber contender wasn't necessarily a fluky deal. I think that it comes down to the simple fact that he can push his way back into the narrative of conversation, championship talk, wins. He's certainly got the talent and the ability, and it's just a matter of putting it together. And it's difficult because, as we've seen, this series, year after year, somehow continues to just get more stacked with talent, and it's so tough. We talk about globally, everybody looks at F1 and they're like, oh, who's going to be the mid-pack top-tier guy? Well, that's in teams. I can tell you that you look at IndyCar, and everybody looks at Newgarden and Rossi and Dixon. How in the hell do you get out of the mid-pack for IndyCar? Because you're going to have to go out there and slug it out with the best of them, and everybody's going to have a bad day at least once. I mean, even Newgarden had a couple of bad days last year, and he won the championship by a pretty handy margin. At some point, these guys definitely got to find a way out of that mid-pack, and I think this is the year that Graham's definitely got to prove that.
Now, I totally agree with you, and I have nothing else to add to that, so instead I'll go a different direction, just because he's the guy too, to me, Graham, and there's just nothing more than I can say. I thought he would take that next step and be the guy. I thought that Ray Hall, Letterman, Lanigan Racing was going to make it the big four behind Penske, Ganassi, and Andretti, because they were during that manufacturer aero kit era. It just never came to fruition. The other guy that he gets compared to so often, and I think it's over. I'm going to say it right now, I think it's over. Marco Andretti had such a woeful, miserable year last year, and it was a different kind of year for him. He's transitioning into the ownership side with his own car and his own team, which is kind of an umbrella team with Brian Herta. And I know that he's starting to look towards the future a little bit. We know that Marco can drive a car. I'm not questioning his talent. I am questioning his talent compared to the things that have happened in the post-merger era. You go back to the old IRL, and one, it was an oval series. Marco's an oval guy, nearly won the Indy 500 as a rookie. We all know the story. And I think that this series has become so tough. And the same thing applies to Ray Hall, too. I mean, I think we all know that Graham Rahal can drive any kind of car. You see it in his sports car stuff. Like, he's good. He's solid. But you look at the top half of the grid right now, these guys aren't solid. They're elite. They're all elite racing. We're wrestling fans, so this is AER. So for Marco, I just want to see Marco return to the top 10 with regularity. I want to see him do well at the places you expect him to do well. Iowa, the location of his last win, the 500. We used to come to the 500 the month of May every year and talk about, is this Marco's year? We're not having that conversation anymore. So to me, it's Marco. Before we go, I wanted to make this an hour-long podcast, and we're getting close to the end. There's two stories here that I want to touch base on, and it goes back to McLaren, and that's the two prominent outsiders who are going to spend time in the McLaren car, and that's Fernando Alonso and Jimmy Johnson. Fernando Alonso nearly won this race in a McLaren Andretti car a couple of years ago. I'll start there. I want to talk about Jimmy Johnson too, but let me just ask you this, Joey. It's a full-fledged McLaren, but with Sam Schmidt Racing's old team, so their stuff is good. It's a Chevy team now, though, and it's going to change the dynamic a little bit. How well do you think Fernando's going to? He's going to have the best that everyone has to offer. Chevrolet, McLaren. Can he go to Indy and complete the Triple Crown?
I mean, certainly, I think if you hit the right setup on the right day, or even better, if Indianapolis picks you, right, it doesn't matter the circumstances. That's why we have Clutch and Coast and all these remarkable victories of the past 100-plus years. But I think the biggest thing it comes down to is preparation. I mean, Zach Brown took full responsibility of the incident last year where they had Bob Fernley appointed for the IndyCar program, and it failed. There's no other way to say it. They stepped on themselves and made a mess of it. And personally, I felt like we were going to have bigger fallout than what we did. But Zach Brown took responsibility, and you have to give him credit for how he's elevated the Formula One team, doing it with a similar situation that he's doing with IndyCar, a young lineup with Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz. And he's doing a similar lineup here in IndyCar with young guys. But I think the biggest thing is you look at the engineering staff and all the pieces in place, and it's the fact that they have an understanding of how the operation is supposed to go. So make no mistake, Fernando's going to have every ability to win. He's going to have every ounce of data at his fingertips that he could possibly want. I think the intriguing thing is there's still a lot of unknowns because you're looking at a team that quite honestly doesn't have any universal aero experience with the exception of Pato, who has a handful of races. So that's the biggest thing in play. But I say this, and I said it to you off the record when we talked about Jimmy Johnson, talent translates. Alonso definitely has it. Can he complete the Triple Crown? Yes. Will he? Honestly, I don't believe so because I think that, as you said, the top echelon of this group, the top 10 of the IndyCar series is elite. And even though he's a two-time Formula One world champion, you're coming into a playhouse and you performed well in a setting with a manufacturer aero kit where passes were set up for guys to be a little bit easier. This is a situation where, as Joseph said many times, you have to run ragged the entire race just to get to the top 10, let alone keep up with the top 10. And once you're there, it's a dogfight constantly to just stay in the thick of it. And that's what this Universal Aero Kit presents. And it's just a tough battle. We've seen passes few and far between, but I also think that that's what makes the on-track battles a lot more significant. And I think it comes down to experience. Maybe next year, I think, but does he have the talent and is he capable? Yes, but my personal feeling is that doesn't happen this year.
Yeah, because it's so hard. No one goes to the Indianapolis 500 expecting to win. Ask any Andretti, right, after the start of the curse. So,
well, it just ended, technically, if you believe in that sort of thing.
I don't believe in that sort of thing. As a driver, the curse. So let's talk about, Jimmy. I hope to God that we're able to test. It's a month from now, so the world isn't becoming a prettier place anytime soon, unfortunately. So I hope that Barber takes place. That's my home race. So I hope that we can cover a race in my home area. I'm from Mobile, so it's a 3-hour drive for me to get to Birmingham. Jimmy's supposed to test on Monday after that race here in a month, and I am so excited for him to be able to drive these kind of cars, because I'm going to give you some perspective on Jimmy. To see Jimmy kind of flirt with IndyCar the way he has over the last year, and open wheel cars in general, ever since doing the drive swap, the car swap with Fernando, has been so much fun, because 10 years ago when I first started covering stock cars and NASCAR professionally, Jimmy Johnson was as anti-open wheel as it gets. He was a bona fide open wheel snob. I remember watching an IndyCar race at home, or an F1 race rather, at home, and Jimmy had made fun of the procedural racing, and he made fun of how easy the cars were to drive in his opinion, which certainly guys who have done both F1 and IndyCar kind of agree about F1. But he's kind of taken shots at the safety elements of the cars, sometimes rightfully so, over the years. But as the cars have become more safe in open wheel standards, the aero screen has completely changed the dynamic for Jimmy. Jimmy being satisfied with his Cup career coming to a close this year, and I think that with the Cup cars becoming so dumbed down with downforce and low power, I think these cars are so fascinating to the racer in him. And I think he's going to have such a fun time. He's had fun with the simulator. He's had fun hanging out around the paddock, going down to spring training at Circuit of the Americas. I don't know what to expect of him in the car. It's not a Penske car. It's not a McLaughlin situation. We got to talk about him too. Damn it. That's how we'll close the show. So it's not like he's going to be in the best car. I don't know how he's going to do. Joey, you're more equipped to talk about outsiders coming in and getting in the car. It's not like Kurt Busch, where you have the month of May and it's kind of a similar, familiar driving style in ovals. I know that Jimmy's a really good road course racer. He's been able to hang with Jeff Gordon and Tony Stewart head to head over the years. He can road race with the best of them. I don't know what to expect though, and I'm curious, knowing what you know about that team and the people there, and Jimmy Johnson by reputation, what kind of driver he is. What are your expectations of him when he goes to Birmingham to test?
So I think the key thing in this whole situation, I joked about it, and it wasn't necessarily a joke, but talent translate. It's 2:15 in the morning, so excuse us for stepping over ourselves at this point. But I think with Jimmy, I think he'll be within a second of what qualifying pace would be, because the team's already there, the team's already set up, and he's really good. And to me, I think it's easier, and notoriously, you look at history, it kind of proves it, right? You look at Dario's transition from open-wheel cars to stock cars, and it was a very difficult transition. You look at Sam Hornish, same story. But you look at guys that transition from stock cars and go over to Indy cars. It's a heavier car that you transfer over from the stock cars heavier. You come over to Indy car, it's a little lighter. So maybe there's just a natural comfort immediately because you're feeling more grip immediately. And to that, I think it's an easier teaching method, and I think that he'll do fine. What I'm intrigued to see is what this test leads into. Like, do we see him continue to run more tests before he gets comfortable, or do we see himself, Jimmy Johnson, actually test his mettle in a race sooner rather than later, maybe by the end of the season if situations play out the right way? We talk about gaps in the NASCAR schedule where this could potentially make sense. And quite honestly, the other element is, what about Saturday night races where maybe NASCAR's racing on a Sunday and IndyCar's racing on a Saturday night or vice versa? You know, I mean, how often do we used to see that when the Xfinity Series, I used to call it the Busch Series, so all the time, got used to that, would be up in like Road America, but the series would be out in California or be in another part like Phoenix, and you see a Cup guy, you know, take the last place starting spot and charge up through the field because they're not going to risk their Cup weekend, but they're in the Xfinity race, and they do those things. And I think you could see a similar thing. And I think just touching on this before and hopefully not getting too tipped off here into another segue before we close, is I think a new golden era is kind of upon us, and in some ways it's because of the lack of sponsorship that is guaranteed for full funding now. And so you run into a scenario where guys like Connor Daly would just drive anything they can. And obviously it paid off in spades for him. There's obviously interest because it's like, what else does Jimmy have to prove on the NASCAR circuit? You know, go have fun, do things, live a little bit of life, race a lot of cool stuff. But I think that another element to this is just from a natural standpoint is things are becoming so limited from a sponsorship revenue with teams that you can't always guarantee rides. And so to that end, teams can't always limit rides, and they can't cut these drivers off at the knees and say, no, sorry, you can't go, because what power do they have if the sponsor's not going to cut the check? So I think we're approaching some interesting territory, but we'll see how that goes along. That's a conversation for another day altogether. But you alluded to Scott McLaughlin. Sorry, I always want to call him Sam McLaughlin. It's like a Sarah McLaughlin commercial or something. I look at this guy. I met him at COTA for the first time. He just oozes this rock star status.
Gravitas.
Yes, very much so. It's just a cool guy, right? And he showcased that talent immediately at COTA. Joseph Newgarden said that when he steps in at the Indy GP, if he finishes 10th, that is an incredibly successful day. I would go a step further and say that I think this guy can go in and battle for a top 5 and potentially a podium if the situation plays out right, strategy, etc., because we all know how these races can be at road and street courses. This guy has just got it. Like, to put it bluntly, just kind of that cool persona, that driving mentality that Robbie Wickens came in with that rookie year, and just how awesome he lit it up. I look at that, and I compare a lot of that because that's exactly what it reminds me of, is just that kind of just natural pace. And to me, Robbie's kind of always the reserve guy. I don't know Robbie quite as well as others, so he always seems reserved to me. But I look at this guy, McLaughlin, and he's proven all he can prove in V8 supercars. And I think it says something when Penske's like, okay, you want to go do IndyCar? Let's go. And I think that also speaks to IndyCar. This guy is used to running tin tops in Australia, but his natural drive says, I don't want to come to America and run NASCAR like what was thought of for the last 20 some odd years by people. Yeah, exactly. Like Ambrose, but you look at the Jeff Gordons and the Tony Stewarts back in the day that we allude to, and or that we hear so much about. And this guy just comes in and immediately just wants to go and race IndyCar because, where he grew up, it was kind of the thing that caught his attention, and it's what he always wanted. And well, here we go. And I think he's going to do really well. I'm just kind of interested to see how, as the season goes along, do we see him as a permanent fixture at Penske moving forward? I think the answer is naturally yes. I think the other question to that, though, is at what expense? And I think he's going to fit into the series really well. And I'll tell you right now, we talk about Will Power and Scott Dixon kind of being those Aussies, New Zealanders that are kind of later in their career, longer in the tooth. Well, you got a guy that's straight from that territory, and Scott McLaughlin, who can definitely lead that charge for another decade or maybe even 15 years, because he's in his mid-20s and he's done the job. And the sky's the limit with this guy. He can put some serious heat on a lot of these guys moving forward.
Yeah, totally. And I haven't had a chance to interact with him yet. And, you brought it up because I talked about how excited I am too. And I think that's the best place to end off the show. We've talked about so much things that don't excite us, the very real concerns and fears that we face. And again, I do not want to downplay that. I take with extreme seriousness the things that are happening, and I hope everyone listening is able to stay safe, listen to the professionals, and just do the right thing. I mean, I think the main thing is just keep yourself clean, make good decisions. Try your best not to go around anyone that is older or immune compromised. Sit at home and I guess watch racing, because I think that NASCAR and IndyCar seems fit to give you that option. And that's where I'm going to end off. So since it seems like we're going to have racing, maybe, when it comes to IndyCar, because we're talking IndyCar, you talked about Scott. We've talked about the championship battle. We've talked about some of the star drivers. I'll ask you this. You don't get to answer the Indy 500 because we all love the Indianapolis 500. What race on the schedule are you most looking forward to covering this year? And I'll end off the show with my answer.
IndyCar race. That's the take. Oh, man. Laguna. Mostly because as a kid, that was the place that I loved. That was it. And unfortunately, situation played out, and I wasn't able to get there last year. I have covered races there before. It's just a magical, beautiful place. It's everything that I hoped it would be. Whenever the aura that it had as a kid when I finally went there. And I haven't seen IndyCars live return there, and that's probably the one race that I'm most looking forward to on the schedule.
Yeah, God, I wish I had a different answer, because I wanted to be able to play devil's advocate. I went there for the first time last year, and that place is so cool. That area is so cool. I actually gave myself a day on Monday to kind of hang out in the greater San Francisco Bay Area, and I wish I had left myself more. I loved spending time at the racetrack. I actually thought I would spend more of Saturday after qualifying to go wander around the greater Bay Area, and that wasn't the case, because I just wanted to walk around the racetrack. Like even during the Road to Indy and the Indy Lights stuff, I thought the racetrack was so cool to walk over to the Corkscrew, and it's built on a mountain. That place is so darn cool, and I hope that the cancellation, or the postponement rather, of Long Beach doesn't make Long Beach the championship. I hope that we still have a championship to talk about, but I hope that Laguna Seca remains the championship race. I was kind of critical of the decision to move it away from Auto Club, because I like the oval, and Sonoma didn't totally work for me. I didn't think that was a good racetrack. I know a lot of people had questions about Laguna Seca becoming the championship race. I have none of those questions anymore. What a great venue! What a great racetrack! I thought the racing was good. You add the championship implications and double points, and I thought last year's championship was so compelling. You had three guys at various points who you thought, there could have been a mistake made. So there was real drama, and I love that area. I'm with you. I can't wait for that, and I hope that we're able to talk about that come September. I hope there's no major changes. If you stuck around and listened to an hour and 10 minutes of this, thank you. You're the real ones. And again, I cannot express this enough. Bear with us. We're in uncharted territory here at Autoweek and in the motorsports community, and we're going to try our best. I don't know what to expect this weekend. I don't know what sort of content we're going to be able to give. We're going to try our best. And I've said it all the time, and I want to mention this on every podcast. I can't do what I do for a living without you. I know that Joey's put in a lot of work, and he's making great strides as a storyteller, and he can't do this without you guys either. We think the world of you, so stay safe. Again, make the good choices. I want to continue talking race cars with you guys for a long time, and I don't want to blow this whole thing out of proportion, but just know that make the right choices. I want to keep talking racing with you guys, and I want to keep talking IndyCar racing with you guys. So, Joey, is there anything else?
I honestly just hope that we get this thing underway this weekend, and amid all of the negativity that's kind of spurned over the world, it's just literally this thing has draped the earth, and it's been really difficult for so many people. I just hope that maybe this weekend this race goes on and it can bring a little bit of happiness to everybody's lives. So that's my closing thought.
And that's all there is to it. We'll talk at the racetrack this week, and it'll be something. So, I'm on Twitter at Matt Weaver AW. Joey, you're Joey Barnes 85.
Correct.
Yeah, and we'll be at Autoweek _racing. Follow along. It's going to be an interesting weekend. So we plan to do one of these podcasts at the end of the weekend, hopefully, knock on wood. And we will talk to you again after a while.